All right, let's go ahead and kick off today's webcast, Transforming Supplier Management with Graphite Success Story. All lines have been muted to ensure call quality for today's presentation. Give me a moment. There we go. Just want to introduce the Digital Transformation in Action webinar series. The Digital Transformation in Action webinar series highlights case studies for a variety of procurement and P2P technology solutions. In this series, you can expect to hear from organizations who have implemented and piloted these technologies and better understand how the tools are helping them succeed. Additionally, each session is hosted by the associated technology vendor to provide further details on the offering. So moving forward and past our agenda, give me a sec. There we go. All lines have been muted to ensure call quality for today's presentation. We are recording this session, and you will receive an email with the presentation deck and recording link within 48 to 72 hours of today's event. If you are in need of technical assistance, please message the host through the Zoom chat feature. To view this presentation in full screen mode, click on the full screen icon in the upper right-hand corner. This will enable full screen access. And at the bottom of your screen, you will find the main control panel. From here, you can access the Q&A feature to submit questions. Attendees of today's webcast are eligible for 1 hour of continuing education credit. In order to receive CPE credit, the attendee must be present for a minimum of 50 minutes, participate in all polling questions, as well as complete the webcast survey, which will pop up in a separate internet browser tab once the webcast is finished and you've closed out of Zoom. The learning objectives for today's webcast are to understand the latest trends related to supplier onboarding and technology adoption, to review the drivers of value related to improving the supplier onboarding process, and to understand best practices related to the supplier onboarding process. Last but not least is to discuss the benefits of a best-in-class supplier onboarding solution. Looking at upcoming webcasts, our next webcast is Understanding Artificial Intelligence and Gen AI in Procurement on June 12th. So if you haven't done so, make sure you register, and we look forward to seeing you there. With that, I'll turn it over to Kurt Albertson to kick off the webcast. Kurt, over to you.
Thank you. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so let me just share a little information before I turn it over to yeah, this is the right slide here to Conrad and Eric. So first and foremost, and this is hot off the press, right? So, we recently did at the Hackett Group, a technology performance study looking at kind of trends and what's happening out there in the market with respect to source to pay technology. And one of the questions we asked was, over the last 2 years, what functionality have you really been focused on? And you see over there on the right-hand corner, these supplier onboarding portals right now is the hottest area. Almost just under half of organizations that participated in the study over the last 2 years have done something in this area with respect to some type of technology implementation to support that process. Next slide, please. So let's do a quick poll here. How would you rate the maturity of your supplier onboarding process today? And Courtney, can we kick off the poll? There it is. Well-established, mature, and standardized, balancing risk management with efficiencies. Well-established and standardized, but typically taking much too long to complete. Standardized, but generally viewed as a cumbersome process without clear accountability. Or immature, lacking standardization and taking too long to complete, or not sure. So give you a second there to kind of respond to that poll. And this is I can tell you just not only from the data that we see from the studies that we're doing, but also the conversations that I and our other advisors here at the Hackett Group are having with our clients. This whole supplier onboarding process is one of the areas that's been getting a ton of attention over the last several years. Can we show the results? Okay, standardized, but generally viewed as cumbersome without clear accountability. That's kind of what I expected. Seems to be for most of us, almost half. So thank you for that. And that's often what we find. Cumbersome, crosses a lot of different parties, no clear end-to-end accountability, a lot of different systems we're having to use. Next slide, please.
Sorry.
Interesting enough, right? You know, that's, like I said, this is one of the hottest areas we're seeing in terms of companies looking at technology implementing over the last couple of years. This came from our key issue study that we did heading into 2024. And across what we call the core functionality, you see again supplier onboarding at the bottom. And what I want to zero in on is the bottom right-hand side there. If you look across all this functionality, this is the one area that clients continue to tell us, you know what, we did something here, but it fell short of our expectations. You know, some organizations get good results, but of any of the core functionality across that source to settle space, it is this supplier onboarding process that tends to, after implementing some type of technology, companies still not feeling like they're getting the business realization that they expected. Why is that? Let's talk about it. If we could go to the next slide. After another quick poll, I'll kind of cue you in on what our perspective is on that. So second poll, what is the primary approach that you use to enable your supplier onboarding process today? Is it a best-in-class point solutions like Graphite? Is it a end-to-end suite solution? You know, one of the big kind of source to settle suite solutions that are out there and their embedded functionality. Are you relying on your ERP functionality coupled with email? You created something homegrown. The process is largely manual, relying on email and attachments and sending those around, or not sure. So if you could just give me a perspective on that. I'll share with you my perspective on why so far we see a lot of companies still not getting the value that they expected in this functional area. And I bet the results of this poll are going to help us understand that. All right, so if we could show the results there, Courtney. All right, process is largely manual, ERP functionality, end-to-end suite solutions, not sure, kind of pretty much everything with the exception of best-in-class point solutions. And that's about what I expected. And that should cue you in on my observation from our data. So if we could go to the next slide. The perspective we have is, look, this process is very complex. We've got a lot of objectives, everything from, you know, collecting a lot of data and information from suppliers, mitigating risk, going through cybersecurity checks, so on and so forth. It's a very complex process. It touches a lot of different folks. What we are tending to see, and I won't go through all the details, this again came from our technology study we just closed out. We are seeing the biggest growth area in terms of strategy for technology is to kind of, you know, find for certain functionality, look for these kind of best-in-class point solutions to combine with your end-to-end suite or ERP solution where needed. And this happens to be, this supplier onboarding process is one of those areas that we do generally over the last couple of years have been seeing organizations really look for best-in-class point solutions, because the functionality and some of the suite solutions and ERP solutions just don't get them to what they need. So that's why we're seeing that high not achieving business objective realization that I showed you on that last slide. And I think that sets us up nicely for the conversation we are about to have. So what I would like to do now is introduce both Conrad Smith, the CEO and founder of Graphite, as well as Eric Thomas, Senior Director of Corporate Services at Ancestry, to talk about their journey in this space and what they've done to achieve business realization, to get the value that they expected. Eric, Conrad, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Kurt. That introduction was really interesting, right? I was struggling as the head of procurement at Adobe for quite a while on onboarding. And during those days, we were actually leasing some space upstairs from one of the Ancestry buildings here in Utah. And that's where I had the opportunity to meet Eric, because I really wanted to understand, you know, what are other procurement leaders doing? What are the struggles that they're having? And are some of the ideas that I was having at the time, are they going to prove out and be valuable? And that started a relationship that I've had with Eric now for, gosh, Eric, I don't know what it's been, probably almost 6 years, maybe 7 years. Yeah. It's been really great. I appreciate you joining me today to talk a little bit about that journey. I think first you'll walk and you'll give us a brief introductory to Ancestry itself. I'm kind of the master slide mover here, so just holler when you're ready for me to advance slides. It seems like it should be easier than it is, but there we go.
No, I appreciate that, Conrad. Thank you. Yeah, I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here with all of you today and talk about Ancestry's journey through what Kurt just described as supplier onboarding and some of the challenges. We are no different. We faced exactly very similar issues. But first, I'll just go a little bit of background of Ancestry, kind of where we came from, and then I'll go through some of the challenges and then successes that we've had. So those of you who may not know Ancestry.com, we are a family history company. We're definitely technology driven. That drives our family history product as well as our consumer genomics product. And we offer the ability to develop and just explore and discover your family history and the journeys that it may take you on. Next slide, please. So a little bit of background. Ancestry, excuse me, Ancestry has been around for actually quite a while. We started in 1983. We were a publishing company who produced books and magazines and periodicals regarding family history. We launched Ancestry.com in 1996, which brought everything to the web and to where you could explore and do research online. In 2012, we introduced our consumer genomics product. And as you can see, as we go through on to current day, we are the largest family history provider and consumer genomics company in our space. We have billions and billions of records that people can research and discover, as well as millions of people in our DNA network, and that continues to change daily as we expand and grow worldwide.
Eric, one of the things I like the most, well, I've really enjoyed our relationship, but I remember in those early days you gave me like a friends and family pass to get my DNA done, and I did that. My wife did it. It was a pretty cool experience to go out and see where our ancestries come from. It was a little different than I expected, but not massively. But it's a really cool product. It's really neat what you guys are doing.
Yeah, thank you. There's definitely some awesome discoveries that people make each and every day. So it's a fun place to work.
My wife's going to shoot me if she ever hears this, but I was telling everyone forever that I was 164th Indian because that, for some reason, I thought I heard that in some old family reunion or something. But I wasn't able to find that in the DNA, unfortunately. It's been part of my story for a long time, and I've had to update my story.
She caught you in your story. Yeah, just as again, some additional background, the Ancestry brand is obviously very well known, and then there's all these other brands that we do support and run worldwide, and they all have different purposes and different objectives, but they come back to that same core function of family history. So you may see some of these other brands around representing Ancestry. Next slide, please. So thank you. So going into Ancestry sourcing, as Conrad mentioned, I was hired here at Ancestry 6 years ago to start the sourcing function. I was here less than 6 months, and they decided to expand the role, and it became corporate services. So I have several teams around, but the main function is source to settle or procure to pay. And as I looked at the process, we had an ERP system and we had some basics, but it was all departments and groups and teams were doing their own things. So what I did is very similar to an approach taken by many, and that is look at people, process, and tools and how we dissect this out and what we do to create a sourcing function that works and obviously brings value to the business. What we have created is a centralized business model that supports the company worldwide. So we have offices in the United States, in Europe, as well as Australia to support our customer base. And again, that continues to expand over almost monthly. But the centralized business model, as we were looking at from start to finish, where can we automate? Which that's a big theme of mine. Anybody who's worked with me is definitely automate. And how can we create value for the business? When we start taking the process apart and putting it back together, one thing, starting at the very beginning, was supplier onboarding. One thing we found was we really didn't have too much of a process. It was what's been previously described as we had a person she was awesome. And she had a document, and she would jockey that document around to internal people as well as the suppliers. And then if there's any updates to supplier records, that would go through that same process. A lot of manual review, data entry, as well as the risks or the controls around the risks were pretty non-existent. So I started looking for options and solutions as to how we can bring this up to a current level in technology. Started with what I think was reflected in the polls here that Kurt did earlier, and that is we started with our ERP. We have a fairly familiar ERP. It does have a portal, so we started going down that road. What we soon found is the flexibility or the ability to capture data that we needed and wanted to report on in our metrics was not there. We couldn't change much because it was fairly rigid. The user interface or the customer experience, when I say customer, I mean employees within Ancestry, was pretty difficult. And so, as Conrad mentioned, we've been having conversations. He had this idea and he was going through the process of implementing that idea. So we came to, I would say, a perfect intersection where we were looking for a tool. The ERP really wasn't working, and Conrad had taken his vision and brought it to life. So if you want to go to the next slide.
Hey, Eric, I want to highlight something that maybe it didn't come out quite enough in the discussion here, but Ancestry is a very, what was it, 1983 or something? This is a very, what is that, 50 years now, or what's my math, 40 years now, something like that?
Yeah. That's
a really mature business. But if I remember right, when you came in to lead the procurement team, it was pretty immature. There wasn't a deep and robust procurement team and process in place. Am I remembering that right?
That is correct. There was actually no process in place other than creating a PO, paying an invoice. That was about the extent of it.
Yeah. And you previously had worked at a very large organization as well. And I talked to a lot of teams, and I find it interesting that this supplier onboarding problem is not it's not found in just small teams or just big teams. It feels like it's a global procurement problem, not like in around the world, but like everybody's dealing with this issue.
Oh, very much so. And like I said, when we first started just taking the process apart, first thing we wanted to tackle is our supplier database, supplier master, because we had suffered or worked through similar issues that I think everybody does, and that is inconsistent process. Like I said, people would call this person. She did a fantastic job, but she would hurry and respond and take care of an issue, but that led to data integrity issues. There wasn't consistency. Again, she was typing in items from the form into the ERP system, and then if there were any changes, a supplier moved addresses or changed banking, that was done through email. So that back and forth, that manual process caused me a lot of concern as a process owner, with risk as well as potential for fraud and just the overall process efficiency. It's very, very manual. So I think this problem is reflected in the numbers where it's pretty consistent. We're not alone, but I think we did find a solution that solved these problems, and we can talk through that, and definitely took us to the next level. Next slide. So as been talked about, I connected with Conrad, and we started exploring Graphite Connect. Graphite Connect did quite a few things for us. First of all, excuse me, it brought consistency to the process. We had one place to go. We were able to put the process behind our single sign-on technology. So security was happy in that when we access and trade information back and forth, that it's secure. Then we also took out the manual process. So instead of the person on my team taking each and every document and manually typing it in, we pushed out the new supplier justification form to the general population and said, if you need a new supplier, here you go. You can fill in the form. It's a one-page form. It's actually very, very simple. But we could also bring in things like privacy questions or security questions to start building a little background on the supplier and to start giving a little more data and enriching the profile within the ERP system. So then once that is submitted, then you're off and running. There's the end user has really just to monitor until it's set up. Graphite takes that once it's submitted, they do all the third-party checks. So this is the part that we love, and we continue to it bears much success for Ancestry, and that is the validation of the data. So whether it's address, just simple things like address or tax identification number, banking information, who they say they are. So, multi-factor authentication, those types of things has helped us reduce our risk dramatically. Obviously, in our world today, there's always some level of risk. The Graphite Connect has taken that to where they do a lot of that heavy lifting for us.
Eric, one of the things that pops to my mind is that early vision that we were talking about. In those days, I was a member of the Bay Area Procurement Council, the BAPC, a bunch of CPOs in the Bay Area that were regularly meeting and talking. And this idea of like sharing this super heavy work that we're all doing amongst ourselves sort of started to seed this idea that why do every one of us have to look at the W-9 for Microsoft or Google or Adobe or any of these companies, right? Why do every single one of us have to validate the bank data? We're all doing all of this redundant work and forcing redundant work on the suppliers. So this network model enables Graphite. I mean, you're talking about things that we're doing for you, like the data validation. It gives me a lot of pride to hear you say that, because what we're kind of doing is taking this service or this function that's inside the procurement teams and not just giving you software and a portal to do it, but bringing expertise and resources in a way that we do this better than anyone in the world, right? For most procurement teams, supplier onboarding is kind of a side process hassle that kind of has to be dealt with. But within Graphite, it's our passion, right? And because of that, we're bringing the best technology, the best data, and AI and all these security, all these things together that individual procurement teams simply can't really afford to do. So for us, we love it. It's a lot of fun, and it just makes me really happy to hear you talk about the success that you're having with the services.
Yeah, no, and to that point, it's been a huge relief for us in dealing with our information security team, as well as I report to our CFO and the concerns there, to where we have multiple sets of eyes on different suppliers along the process to ensure as best we can to make sure that we're reducing that risk. And again, that is on Graphite, and I love the flexibility. And the Graphite is always releasing new monthly new technology, new items, and the flexibility in what we have gained, where we can call our account person and say, hey, we need something new in the new supplier justification form, or we need to capture a new piece of data. And usually within a week or two, it's in place, and we're off and running, and we can start capturing the metrics. Where previous to that, it was non-existent, or we couldn't do it in the ERP system. So I think that the overall service level, as well as the flexibility and the relationship that we have built with Graphite, has been fantastic in taking our supplier onboarding to the next level. If I was able to answer one of the poll questions earlier, I would say our supplier onboarding process is best in class. And not because of Ancestry, it's because of our partnership with Graphite.
Well, that's awesome. Hey, unscripted question here, I think that might be helpful to the attendees. A lot of companies I talk with think about supplier onboarding as commercial data only.
Yep.
I see in here that you have third-party risk management, and I think I know that you have strategically sort of evaluated whether you include that third-party risk management, cybersecurity, privacy, those concerns as part of onboarding. Or so if people are trying to figure out, well, what do I include in my onboarding scope? IT is doing this, and maybe legal privacy is doing that. How do you look at it, and how would you guide people to think about supplier onboarding and creating the most efficient process you can? And that's not like a softball to talk about Graphite or anything, but I think it'd be really helpful, because I see so many models and opinions out there.
Yeah, no, and it's a very good question, because we were wrestling with those same questions from the very beginning. Privacy, obviously, they want all the data they can get to where they can start investigating, especially if we're going to be exchanging data, or they're going to have access, the supplier will have access to our systems. And then info security, very similar vein. So we put a bunch of stuff in there right up front. And I will say it's iterative. We've had to dial some back, and we've had to add. So we've added some additional contact, additional questions, additional pages, links to pages, and or we've also taken some away. So it took a little while, but working with the account team, I think we've got it to where it's pretty efficient now. We used to get customers hung up in some of the privacy questions, especially some that aren't quite as technical or as knowledgeable about privacy. If you're in Europe, yeah, that you know very well about that. But it's gone actually pretty well, but it has taken some trial and error. And now we feel like we're in a great spot to where we are asking some privacy questions up front. We are asking some info security questions up front. And then but it gives a very complete profile once they hit our supplier master.
Yeah, yeah, that's always a little bit of a tricky one because you have these other stakeholders with huge passion, and the risk teams generally they kind of feel like they have unlimited budget to have as much time and as much data and documents and everything else. And in the meantime, our business stakeholders are like, "Hey guys, why is this taking so long? Like we're trying to run business."
I can't deal with all this because I mean it could turn in, especially with privacy and I'm not downplaying that at all. That is a huge concern, but it could be pages upon pages. So there's a balance, and you have to find what works for you and your situation. But the good thing about that is the system is flexible to where you can arrive at that balance fairly quick.
I'll advance the page here. Sorry, I'm not trying to delay here. Just a shout out to all the procurement leaders on the phone, just how important this is, because I think we're not just doing procurement, we're becoming the voice of the customer and the voice of the process to bring that balance in. Like, I think if we relinquish that, then we end up in a place where I think number 3 or number 4 on one of Kurt's surveys was, it just takes forever. And then we all, including those risk teams, we all lose credibility with our business requesters and stakeholders.
Well, the needs, like on the previous slide, the last logo is global. We are global. And so meeting the needs in each geo or each location, there's also a little bit of difference. And that's another thing that we look for is flexibility to be able to meet those needs while it's all coming back to a centralized database. So it definitely, Graphite helped us on that and helps us accomplish that every day. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so the results that as we implemented and worked with Graphite to, like we've talked about, obviously the issue and then some of the successes, some of the things that we have done, it definitely has sped up our onboarding process. Once the employee submits the new supplier form, they can see exactly, there's a little map where you can see exactly where it's at in the next stages. So graphically, it's displayed easy for them to see what's going on and what needs to take place. Risk management, I can't address enough. That has just been a huge success for us. Our CISO, our chief security officer, he is very pleased with the technology around the two-step authentication, all the validation. That has just been a real success for us in reducing risk and helping try to keep that in a livable level. Automation, it absolutely has automated our process. No more documents back and forth, no more emails, drive-bys, hey, picking up the phone and calling the person in AP saying, hey, can you do me a favor? That's all automated. It's all in the system now, and they can see exactly what's going on and what the supplier needs to do. And it's like Conrad mentioned, if your supplier's already in there, if they're in the network, you can tap into them pretty quick and easy, and it cuts down on even more of the onboarding process because they're already in there. They've already answered the questions once. They've already submitted the W-9, those types of things. And then the network is growing at a pretty good clip to where most of our suppliers, that anything new coming in, we're seeing them in there, and so it just speeds it up even more. Then redeploying our resources. What we did is we took the resource that was on the AP team, and she had a role called supplier manager and doing this whole process of the manual process. We moved her to more of managing the Graphite system and then doing other things, and found that her time became less and less managing this process. In fact, it dropped below 10% pretty quick. As she chose to leave and move on to other things outside of Ancestry, we took a look at it and we moved away. We actually reduced that headcount. So the savings started to become very real and started to really show up in my budget and the costs that I have, as Graphite really took over that role and allowed us to take the resources we had and focus them on higher level work, as well as just eliminating a role altogether. The
That's
other,
something, Eric, I think is pretty unique about how we think about our business. Of course, we're creating software and creating a solution and a platform. But since we are validating the data, we're supporting the suppliers. We're doing like a lot of the things that she would have been doing and that other people are doing. It's part of our service. It's not software as a service. Yes, it is, but it's really service with that software as a service.
yeah, absolutely. And as we've gone through this whole thing, as far as implementing and utilizing, now we're trying to take it to the next level of say, okay, we've had several suppliers, I mean, quite a few suppliers actually in the database that have been here long before Graphite came along. Now we're going back through and putting them through this process. So Graphite has a chance to look at them, has a chance to review, and just make sure that we're looking at every piece of risk that we can and then trying to reduce where we can. And the consistency of the data, making sure that it's as clean as possible, and we keep our supplier master down to a livable level. I know when I got here, we had like between 12 and 15,000 suppliers. That has been reduced dramatically just due to data entry errors. And the putting them through this standardized process has really helped clean that up as well. So a lot of benefits, and a lot of it just kind of, as you go through it, you start to think about, oh, we could use it in this way, and we can utilize it in this way. And so the ideas really start to grow. So I definitely would start to plan out where you want to be, and then follow that plan, because the ideas become endless, and it's actually quite fun to see the process unfold.
Eric, I know you wouldn't have put this on the slide, but I mention this sometimes in presentations. So I'm curious about your take. Again, completely unplanned. Sorry about this. Do you feel like getting this problem, streamlined and moving faster and moving more organized has given you and your organization more credibility with the business?
Absolutely. And even with suppliers, we have a standardized process. We tell them, here, this, you go, we'll send you a link, you go, whether it's the business, you just tell us what you want, and then they submit it. And then on the supplier side, you get to maintain the data. You get to do what, upload or give us the information that we need and want, as well as what you think we should have. That has been a huge success point for us as well, because now we all go through it all goes through the same funnel, and it's all behind our like I said, behind our single sign-on, it's behind our firewall, so that it's very scripted, step by step, how we onboard suppliers, and it's pretty easy.
It's this and other processes that we do in procurement, whether it's creating purchase orders or making sure that invoices are properly paid. A lot of times in procurement, I think we sometimes devalue those. Like, it's just the operational stuff, and we want to jump to sourcing, we want to jump to strategy or even design. Maybe that's the highest level of value, is when we help the business design for cost. But I like to think about this like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and the business needs that bottom layer to work before they really want you playing in those next layers up. So that credibility, to me, that credibility is such an important thing, because at Adobe, I'd go back and I'd be talking to business leaders in the company about things that we wanted to do with the category and sourcing teams. And they would come with an agenda of like 6 purchase orders they wanted to talk about why they're taking so long to get through the system, because their team brought them to them. And it's just stunning how quickly what should be a very strategic leadership conversation goes right down to the bottom layer of the pyramid again. Like, why is it taking so long to onboard it? Why is it taking so long to get the purchase order? And while sometimes we may consider those things to be lower value added, it's important that we remember that this stuff, like the fundamentals of procurement, really matter tremendously to the business. It's one of the most valuable things that we do.
Yeah, if we don't get this right, then I don't think we can go to the next level. And so that was one of the visions that we had in building this process, is let's get the basics right, build the foundation, and then we can move up.
So Eric, there's a lot of people on the team that I think are, from the survey are wanting to, make this kind of progress, independent of graphite or no graphite or whatever. If you were giving them some advice and suggestions about implementing a process with this kind of change, oops, going the wrong way. Like, what would you guide them in terms of the lessons that you've learned?
Well, I think the first one on this is listed on the slide here, and that's change management. What we try to do is we try to go out and ask our customers, ask the employees within the company, if we were to change, say, the supplier onboarding process, and what would good look like for you. So get feedback from the customers, but then also prepare them that some of the work or some of the change, some of the responsibilities are going to fall on you in addition to us. So we work together. So that change management is key. And then just making sure that as you're looking at the automation piece of it, you're not automating the front end and then dumping it on the back end or some other team to where they're doing manual work or they're doing additional work. You definitely want to make sure that the automation is carried all the way through so that it is relief and it provides a benefit for everyone involved that may be touching this. You've mentioned, and I've mentioned a couple of times, the whole source to pay process. A lot of systems or processes that we looked at, yeah, it may automate up front. There's a nice little interface, but then when it comes to AP, it becomes more data entry. It becomes more manual work for them. And so that was one thing we looked at as well, is we wanted automation all the way through so that everybody got a little bit of relief out of it.
That seems like the first generations of self-service where you do my job for me, right? And
yeah. I'll push the electronic form out to you, and then that form is cool, and then that's it. That's as far as it goes.
Yeah.
Where we definitely didn't want that, and what we have implemented does not do that. It's automated all the way through. And I think the biggest also the other piece that was huge for us, and that is risk. Just making sure people are pretty creative. We have had, prior to Graphite, where emails get hacked. We get emails, hey, my bank's changed or whatever. Luckily, we have been we've been very, very fortunate to not be caught up in a lot of that. But with AI and some of the things coming out, super creative. And so it just gives us a sense of, okay, we have someone watching our back, to where we have, like I said before, we have additional sets of eyes looking at it. And there's a standardized process that it goes through, to where if there is some red flags or if there's something going on, it's going to be at least recognized and brought to the attention to where you can make a decision. And so definitely the risk. That's what I would also counsel is make sure it's solving that problem.
I mean, this is, to me, Eric, this is one of those things that, like the center of the hub I talked about, like we can do some of these things better than anybody else can because they're in the center and we have more resources and focus, but the
Right.
security one's really important. And, we, the callbacks and the wasted time and effort and resources that are going into making sure that supplier, bank accounts aren't being hijacked. If I even when I started this business 5 years ago, I was a little bit skeptical how many of my suppliers' emails have been compromised. Over the last 5 years, I've been completely converted to the reality that the baseline assumption that we all need to make is that at least some of the emails at our suppliers have been compromised, period. Like that, the whole industry of stealing and hacking into email accounts isn't just like the person that's trying to steal the bank data is the person that stole the password. There is an incredibly sophisticated sort of dark web nefarious actor industry where billions of dollars, where people are, they're specializing in hacking emails, and then they sell those emails to somebody else who markets them to somebody else it's really scary what happens there. And I think that anything other than having the assumption that your supplier's email has been compromised as a baseline sets the wrong starting point for you or me or anybody, and allows us to sort of in that case, you kind of give the keys to the bank data right over to the bad actor through the email, because we've been acting like that's an okay thing to do, and it really isn't. Like, we have to go, through a much more sophisticated process to protect the data.
Yep, and that has been a huge success for us.
So, Eric, I know that you mentioned earlier just how many improvements that we're making at Graphite on a regular basis. I thought it might be helpful to just sort of lay out a picture here. We just were talking about identity and security. Graphite has recently implemented the most advanced user identity and security controls that are out there in any procurement tool. We don't feel like this is a destination. We think it's a moving target. The deep fake and AI and everything else, we're all reading about it all the time. It's pretty scary. And it's important for us to be good stewards of the network data, your supplier data, and the integrity of the users that are logging in. So we're going to continue to invest in this space. There's some really neat things coming out in the next couple of months to continue to improve. Eric, even some of the super cool stuff you've been seeing lately.
Yep.
We are, like everybody else, we're looking at where AI can help us. Both on the security side, it's a native part of some of the security processes that we've implemented. But we recently just signed a partner deal with Google, their AI team. It's really cool. They are actually funding a couple of big AI projects for us, where they're bringing their AI resources to the table so that we can do a better job in form and data recognition within documents. The first step of that is easy things like, we're already doing data extraction and reviewing W-9s and things like that. But this is going to transition that to the latest and greatest AI, and then set the stage for the ability to read documents and form opinions about the documents that are just kind of less structured documents, say a SOC 2 for the security team, or a code of conduct for the compliance team and legal, or even a certificate of insurance. Some really cool things that are available now in AI that aren't like years beyond this hype cycle that we're in right now. There's some really tangible, deliverable value that's coming to the table right now. Of course, improved reporting and insights. A lot of what you get out of Graphite is in using the tool. It just makes your day and your job easier. We have lots of data and reports available already, but we're going to continue to drive forward on those. And then, one of the things that I always talk to procurement teams about is the best supplier onboarding is no supplier onboarding at all. Just use my preferred suppliers. And that as simple as that sounds, even when I was at Adobe in procurement, the marketing team was constantly struggling with preferred supplier lists, right? Here's our spreadsheet. The head of marketing would go like, come on, people, we need to get this shorter. They would shorten it down. They would share a spreadsheet around. It would work for 3 or 4 months, and then it would just bloat right back up to a big number again. The management of who are my suppliers, who are my preferred suppliers, it's just a very important step of the process. So we've moved sort of one click upstream from onboard the supplier to, do you have a supplier already that does this? Do you have a preferred supplier? As well as some of the process orchestration that would indicate, is there an NDA with this supplier? Or, hey, I need to kick off some process that eventually might include supplier onboarding or is related to the overall procurement process. Pretty neat stuff. And we're seeing a lot of great results from that, both with smaller organizations as well as organizations that have over 100,000 employees in them. There's so much manual work in and around procurement, and such a lack of visibility that every little thing we can do here helps the process. But anyway, that's our roadmap, Eric. I don't know if I put you on the spot a couple of times. I don't know if you have any put Conrad on the spot questions before we call it a wrap, but I'd be happy to take my best shot if you have a question for me.
I don't at this point. So it's been awesome to work with you guys, and I'm not just saying that. We investigated a lot, and I don't usually jump into technology too fast. And it's been a great journey, and you guys have been a great partner. So thank you.
Well, thanks, Eric. So Kurt and Courtney, back to you.
Yeah, so we did get, there are a few questions, if you don't mind, that I'm sure Eric and Conrad, you can knock out of the park here. Conrad, this first one's probably from you, and for those of you who are on, you can submit additional questions through the Q&A functionality. But Conrad, how many golden records have you already validated? How many suppliers are part of the Graphite network? What's the geography of those suppliers? For example, mostly US, EMEA, worldwide, so on and so forth.
I think our validated records are over 100,000 now. That's reflective of customers that are, I think, between 500 and 600,000 combined suppliers. They're bringing their legacy suppliers in different waves and processes depending on who they are. We could talk separately about like what's the best practice in dealing with, you know, validating legacy supplier data and bringing them into the process. I mean, at first glance, you'd be like, hey, they're already onboarded, we don't need them here. But when you weave together the risk process and some of these other things that are required for suppliers over time, like most organizations have a 1 or 2 or 3 year rescreen process in each of these risk domains. So bringing those suppliers in is coming. Our network's growing about 10% per month right now, which is super exciting. So that's fantastic. I lost, there was like 3 questions in there, Kurt.
Yeah, there was. The other question, I think you've answered most of it. The other question was from a geography perspective, where are most of your suppliers located?
Thank you. So from the very beginning, Pure Storage was our, you know, we're going to do a webinar with Pure Storage here in a couple of weeks as well. They were our very first customer, and so customer number 1 had suppliers all over the world. I mean, they have, you know, they have teams in Europe and they have suppliers in Asia. So we had this unique challenge of being a very new startup and supporting suppliers in, you know, dozens and dozens of countries around the world from that very first day. We're now supporting suppliers that are in 150 countries around the world. So wow. we have validated supplier data in, you know, across all those countries. We have automated in many of those countries, and in some of the countries where the volume is really low, manual process to make sure that data is accurate and correct and ready to pay on your side. I would say that the mix of suppliers right now is sort of 50% in the US, 25% in kind of the Europe, Middle East, Africa range, and 25% in the APAC range. Today, a lot of our customers are headquartered in the US, or they're large kind of US global brands. That's changing pretty quickly. You know, we were in meetings yesterday with an organization that's headquartered out of France. It's a very large organization, and that's pretty typical now that we're talking to large and small organizations that are, you know, in all the regions around the world.
Thank you, Conrad. And another question that came in through the Q&A, how do you validate bank account ownership, and are your validations real time? So I think, Conrad, that's probably a question best answered by you. I assume it's referring to the Graphite solution.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I don't know who asked it, but I think that question speaks to what I think is the holy grail of procurement data in the future. There doesn't happen to be one system that has the global banking beneficiary information. Bank data is regulated at a country level. In the US, there's a few solutions. One is GIAC that allows for the checking of the routing number, the account number, against beneficiary information to get flags back as to whether the expected beneficiary is correct. That is one of the service providers that we use for US banking data. But we've taken a slightly different approach. I mean, we are incredibly meticulous to make sure that the person who logs into Graphite is who they say they are. That starts with advanced telecom checks, you know, not just 2-factor authentication on a phone device like we're all familiar with, but at a much deeper level. You know, R2FA is checking this phone and it can see that this phone is registered at AT&T to Conrad Smith. And at different, you know, there's as much as we like or don't like the big data that exists about us all out there, you know, it's there. And, you know, through these telecom checks, they can also see that that this phone number and Conrad Smith has been used in other ways. So multiple sort of vectors to make sure that this phone does belong to Conrad Smith. The fraud that's existing in this place universally is happening with somebody posing as somebody that they're not. You know, somebody like if your email had been hacked and you were a supplier to Ancestry, then a bad actor is presenting themselves as Kurt. So it's virtually impossible for them to present a phone in that 2-factor authentication that has history associated with Kurt, you know, your name and your background. So it's a very robust way for me to make sure that the person coming in is who they say they are, as well as that, you know, you are associated with the organization that you say that you're associated with. So Because that global beneficiary match information isn't there, we are investing more upfront to say the person logging in is who they say they are and that we can trust them. And then from there, we use, additional approvers at that same company to verify that Kurt is actually authorized to make bank data changes, the bank data changes are accurate, etc.
Thanks, Conrad. And I know that question has been around. That question is as old as time itself. And, it's always been a major concern, and it's only getting to be, even more concerned. You hear a lot
about it. One of the cool things that's happening, Kurt, is that because of this network model, we have banking data for suppliers at Ancestry, and therefore we know that if Kurt is a supplier at Ancestry and Ancestry has that data set up properly with Kurt, then we're sort of building that holy grail of data that Kurt, the proper bank account for Kurt, is the one that we have in Graphite. So when another customer connects with Kurt, we can actually say, yeah, that is good bank data for Kurt because we have seen it being used successfully in these other areas. So we already are delivering great value in that space, and that's just increasing to, the size of the database of bank data and beneficiaries is growing. So there's a number of ways that this growing set of data is helping bring more security to this problem.
Yeah, no, great point. And thank you, Conrad. Eric, we've probably got time for one more question. And Eric, you're probably best positioned to respond to this question. Look, we've just been talking about, data security here. That's been a huge emphasis, the risk aspect throughout the conversation that the two of you have been having. Eric, how do you foster a culture within procurement and outside of procurement, frankly, within the general user community that values both efficiency as well as security in the vendor relationships? I heard Conrad talk earlier about, your base assumption should be that one of your suppliers has been hacked. But how do you get that message across as opposed to kind of the general perspective is I need this quick, I need this supplier upboarded quick, I got to get this done and get focused on something else? How do you balance that and create a culture that balances efficiency with the security aspect that needs to go along with vendor relationships?
That's a great question. And I feel very fortunate in that in the business that we're in, we have a lot of sensitive data. And so that is ingrained day one across our company. And so as we go out and we roll, like for example, implementing Graphite, yeah, there were questions around it, but the overall why was really pretty simple. Just making sure that we are keeping things safe and secure as much as possible. And so I think where you may not have the luxury of iPad, where it's more of a company culture, that's definitely part of your change management in making sure. And I think people are aware just in their own personal lives and their own personal banking or we hear about in the news where things get hacked. That's real, and that they definitely need to take that into consideration. And sometimes that risk far outweighs speed. And so just keeping that in the forefront and the why behind it, I think is very helpful. And that has been helpful within Ancestry. Yeah,
no, great point. And as you were going through that answer, it reminded me about a month ago, I was on site with another client and the head of procurement was talking before I came on. And the last statement she made to her team was, look, people may not like it, but we are here to kind of slow everybody down a little bit and make sure, we're not getting the company in trouble. Yep. So great point. Conrad, Eric, any final thoughts before we pass it over to Courtney to close out, or have we already kind of said everything we wanted to say?
You know what? I know procurement's a hard job. I've been at it for almost 30 years. It is just becoming more and more obvious to me how important procurement is to the organization. It's a fun career that we're in. I think we get beat up and don't always feel that way, but it is really cool. And so, shout out to all of you in procurement, keep your chins up, and we're doing hard things. It's okay. I fell into a procurement role in a totally unexpected way. I have a degree in biochemistry. I myself and others expected me to be in a totally different place for 30 years. But looking back, it's just been a phenomenal opportunity for me. So, I've got to, all of you that are procurement people and procurement fans, we're all working together. If I can help any of you in any way, independent of onboarding, I would encourage you to reach out and just drop me a line. I have a number of sort of open mentor, mentee, and just kind of coach and friend relations with folks that have nothing to do with Graphite. I'm happy to help in any way that I can.
Thanks, Conrad. Anything to add, Eric?
Yeah, I just echo similar to what Conrad said, that every day is a new day, and that's the fun part. Just be open to some of the new technologies, but don't be afraid to stand up and be that gatekeeper that you need to. It doesn't have to mean your process needs to be complex, but at least slow it down enough to know you're making a good decision and not getting into trouble. And that's a tough role sometimes, but it can be fun as well.
Thank you. Thank you both, Eric and Conrad, for your time today. Great discussion. And Eric, congratulations on your journey. It sounds like you would be that the few companies we would put at the top of there with respect to a best-in-class supplier onboarding process and approach. Can we go to the final slide, I believe? Courtney, is there another slide you want to pull up to close us out?
Yes, perfect. I just wanted to say, of course, as Kurt said, thank you, Conrad and Eric, for your time and walking us through transforming supplier management with Graphite, a success story. And thank you everyone on the line for joining today's webcast. Just a few quick reminders prior to signing off. We invite you to fill out the survey at the end of this session to please let us know how we did, as this helps us improve future webcasts. Or if you're requesting CPE credit, please fill the survey out in order to obtain your certificate. As a last reminder, the final deck and recording link will be emailed to all registrants within 48 to 72 hours of today's event. And with that, thank you all again, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you.